Okay, so we're doing our campus tour now, and we'll kind of break this up a little bit. Um, just to start out with, this is really pretty. This is a weeping cherry. Now this does not look like it should because it's a horticultural variety, so don't even zoom in. But you can see the hypanthium. Remember we talked about how it's fatter here? So see how that's fat there, and sometimes you can see how it's a cup shape. So it's a bowl that things are in. So that's great characteristic for the rose family. Okay. Now, what I really want you to see, you can stay there. See that this looks weird. Why the heck does that look so weird? Well, look at this plant. See how it's got the weeping look to it? Well, that's because it's this mutant thing that looks diseased. And if it's got this, its poor plant has been bred to not be able to grow straight up. So there's no way you could get a trunk from a tree that can't grow straight up because all these branches are falling over. So what they do is they cut a trunk, cut it, and then glue on a different plant. So that's why this looks stupid, because it's a different plant. If you look around, you will find a weeping cherry, because weeping cherries are really common this time of year. And if you send me a photo of a weeping cherry with then a not weeping cherry, because what will happen, the gas station by my house, this tree is still a perfectly good tree. It can grow a branch, and then you'd have like just kind of your typical white cherry tree, and then a couple weepy branches at the base of it because someone didn't take care of it. So look for this. If you actually go to a plant store, almost every tree planted in every yard is actually going to be grafted. This is blatant, but you'll see at the base for almost everything. I should have pointed out in our yard. At the base of almost everything, you can't see in this one, but if you're in a plant store, which you shouldn't do right now because it's dangerous, but if you go to a plant store, look at the base, and they're grafted on. Since we're here, let's just do some of these plants real quick. This is a rose. So I want you to know rose just in general. We just did this yesterday. And so remember what they call these? Starts with an S, stipules. So it's again a projection of the petiole. So those are big stipules. And this is oddly pinnate, serrate, thorns, would have roses on it. So that's a good rose. Remember the rose hips are edible. When they're big, showy ones like this, they do not taste good at all. Don't try it. But the little tiny ones, they're not so good. Another family that we've talked about, square stem. So you don't need to know this plant. I'm not going to tell you this plant because this would be it's a common weed that you could key out yourself. It's got a square stem, opposite leaves. It's hard to see the opposite leaves here. But they're opposite leaves, and then the flowers are coming from the leaf axis, and the flowers are fused together. So there's flowers on top fused and flowers on bottom, so it looks like a mouth. This is Lamiaceae, the mint family. So Lamiaceae, square stem, opposite leaves, flowers from leaf axis, and the flowers are usually two-lipped, is the term. If we look at all these, good monocot, these are all lilies. You can't really tell right now, but when they get flowers, you'll be able to tell. If we come over here, hopefully I can find, yes. All right, we did this yesterday. So these scales, so it's roundish and the scales overlap each other. So this, and it's kind of reddish color. This is a juniper or a red cedar. And then the way you'd really know this is the berries. And I don't know if you guys know what you use junipers for, but these are gin. So they're technically edible, but it kind of tastes like eating pine sap, so I'm not even doing it. But technically they're edible, but you wouldn't, it's not like you'd eat a meal out of them. But you could make gin. And so if you've got the berries, then you know for sure it's juniper. Cool. And then over here, we've got a spruce. Okay, So spruce, this isn't the greatest spruce, but they're pokey. They should be squarish needles, so you should be able to roll them between your fingers. This one I can't, so pretend I could. But then you can poke yourself. And there should be little cones. I don't see any cones. Remember the, we should be able, actually here they're just starting. They're just starting. Maybe we'll see some pine cones, because remember they always start at the tip, and then usually you see a big one back further, but that's because the branch grew. So that's good spruce. Then if we come over here, we've got all right, so these are fun. All right, so this is Douglas fir. Now firs have flat needles and they're soft, so you don't get poked by them. So Fraser fir is your kind of elite Christmas tree, if you will, because it doesn't poke you. And so it's got flat needles, don't poke you. This is a Douglas fir. It's actually not a fir. It's pseudotsuga, but it has a flat needle, so that's why it's called a fir. But what's really easy for Fraser firs, Douglas fir, this one, is they've got these weird things on the cones. So some people call them tridents because they look like a trident, like Poseidon's trident, or rat butts or rat tails because it looks like a rat's butt, if you will. And so if you pulled this off, the seeds on there, I probably won't get the seed because it just breaks. Oftentimes you don't have these because, again, the squirrels will go through and eat them. So this is a recent one. This is an older one. Squirrel went through and ate them all out. Let's see if there's anything else right here. Let's real quick walk fast. And as you're walking around now, this is not your list, but we saw this in my yard. See these flowers? The leaves aren't open yet. Again, this is a horticultural version, but this is a witch hazel. What I didn't mention earlier was you actually use witch hazel to get rid of warts and stuff. Herbal remedy. Isn't it good to like skin something? Go ahead.
It's good for when you nick yourself shaving. It helps vasoconstrict the little nick, and it's also good for itching and acne.
My wife's an ethnobotanist, so they're not open yet. Oh, they're real close to open. These are red buds. It's too bad they're not open. Usually these are open. They're real pretty purple flowers. We'll see them somewhere else. The other thing that's fun about red buds is they're very edible. They taste like bean sprouts. You feel kind of sad though because it's a really pretty flower. For that matter, violets are edible. And they're a pretty purple flower too. Okay, we're gonna run over to here. As you walk around life now, you should be looking at all your plants, seeing if they're monocots, dicots, opposite leaves, alternate leaves, all that kind of stuff. So let's look at this. So smooth, flat needles, and I'm not poking myself. So this is going to be some kind of fir. Okay. This actually is the Douglas fir because you can see the rat tails really sticking out of those cones. See, I mean, those are really coming out. A lot of people just like those cones. They'll keep them as, my daughter would love it. This flower ground cover, we saw it the other day, periwinkle. Okay, real common, invasive. These are actually, these are better flowers right now. I'll try to hold this steady. It's the same one that was in my yard yesterday, but see how they're square, or they make a cross shape? So good brassicaceae. And Then the saliques are actually what you would use to identify them, but they're not quite ripe yet. But the super common weed. And here. Hemlock. These are sad looking hemlocks. But hemlock is easy because they're flat needles and they're really short. And then they get these cute little cones. And that's a full mature cone. That's not just because it's the beginning of the year. That's last year's cone. Hemlocks, and they're getting diseased. There's a thing that's eating them all, and you can see that. Hemlocks would make a horrible Christmas tree. They lose their needles immediately. And let's keep going here. Try to minimize your in-between time. We're not sophisticated enough to do video editing. We've got...
I think it's more Apple's fault.
Yeah. Okay, let's just do this. Since we've got some right here. Opposite leaves. Okay. Looks like a maple because it's a maple. This is a sugar maple. By definition, one of the ways to know sugar maple is this crevice in here. The lobe, it's rounded. That's how to know it's sugar maple. Versus there's also red maple and silver maple are super common, but this one they're real lobed. We're gonna go over the bridge in a minute, but I don't know if I can grab stuff from the bridge. So here is a linden, not linden, basswood. Linden would be the same genus, but the horticultural variety. This is a basswood. These leaves will get really big, like bigger than my hand, but they're heart-shaped and they're asymmetrical, and they're serrate. And this is a super common tree, basswood. All right, there's trout lily in flower. So let's try not to kill ourselves.
Like there's spring beauties down there too.
Yeah, there's spring beauty too. So here, good lily, three petals, 3 sepals. Real pretty. Trout lily. They're one of your earlier flowers. Usually the finals week they start to come out. And then we've got spring beauty. Spring beauty should be finishing now. So there's still a few of them here. We are actually on the south-facing slope, so things are a little slower here. So here's trout lily, and then spring beauty, and they're just so pretty. And look at the those pinks, and then the leaves are just kind of long, linear, entire leaves. But the flower is what makes them. I wouldn't ask you it without the flower and the leaves. So the combination of the two. So good spring beauty. Oh, these leaves for the trees are so small, but we've got, well, that's too small. We'll see what we do. All right, so let's do here. This is actually opposite leaves. It would have a cyme inflorescence. It's going to be a viburnum. Let's pause or stop.